Okay, by 1962, I was convinced that the people to study were the psychoanalysts. Other theorists, other philosophers, theologians, whatever, referred to people back in history and tried to add a few units, but I would call those ice igloos because when they were put to the examination and the hot sun, where you looked at exactly their premises, they melted into a pool of water. So I kept studying one psychoanalyst after another because they were meticulously gathering data and saying precisely what they saw people doing. They studied people, not old holy books. One of the people I studied was Dr. Benjamin Woolman. Now we have to shoot up to about 1978 when Dix and I were married. I was studying Benjamin Woolman, because he studied adolescent boys. He wanted to understand the source of their criminal behavior. And one of his books was called Childhood Fears. And I remember exactly, I mean I can feel it in my body, the moment when I was reading along and I saw what he said. It was kind of an eureka moment for me, a wow, because he said that the real fear of all these kids that were antisocial was the fear of abandonment. Now, this really fascinated me because I already knew by that time that emotions would give the spark to various human behaviors. The scare, the anger, the sad, the happy, excited, tender would trigger stuff. Now I thought to myself, what amazement it would be if there was a second trigger, and it had to do with abandonment. So, as is my custom, the first thing I did was think about evolution. And I thought back to mammals. Mammals have to stay close to the mammary glands when they're born because they need milk. And then I thought, you know, what would happen if a mouse or a man or a whale or any marsupial, whatever, or kangaroo went away from the mother? They would have abandonment fears. You take a pride of lions that you see on television, and you see these little baby lions following the mother. And if they are left, abandonment means death. And so is there an instinct wired into humans that has to do with abandonment? Charles Darwin, of course, showed the muscles in our face when we feel emotions. And we've had 150 years of verification since Darwin wrote his material. And then I began to think, well, I considered evolution. It's pretty clear that if any animal, human for instance, is abandoned, he's going to die. So is there an instinct to adapt to whatever situation you face? Now, one of the things I can do is go back into my mental file of people at churches, about 600 people. The ministry afforded a wonderful place to observe. People would welcome me in their homes, put out hot chocolate, bring forth cookies. And one of my practices was to talk about geography first, like, where are you from? It gave familiar territory for people. And then I said, tell me about your family as you grew up. And they would talk about this. So I had 600 case studies in my mental file in 1978-79 when I was considering this issue of abandonment, the second instinct. Now, I looked A to Z in my mental file because I didn't take a lot of notes. I just remembered everybody. Ackerman, Anderson, all the way to Zukowski, A to Z. So I started thinking about different people. I'll tell you about two. One was Abigail. She would go off in strange, erratic bursts of emotion if you mentioned religion, if you were driving and she passed by a religious building, if she saw a priest, if she saw a nun, she would go off. This was curious. Another thing that was curious about Abigail is that in the winter she would start buying coats. She had probably 75 coats in her house. She was an argumentative lady. And so as I asked her about her history, turned out that she had been given up for adoption, given to a, what do you call them, at a Catholic church orphanage when she was 2.5 years of age. And she was so argumentative, they switched her to different orphanages. And this I began to understand she was abandoned, and she had to make do, but she made do like a 2.5-year-old angry kid that's saying no, 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 and that was still in her personality. Then I flipped to a Z, little Johnny. His mother was sewing on the front porch. The phone rang in the house. She jumped up to answer. She fell off the porch on a rock that pierced into her brain, and she immediately died. Johnny was about 8 years of age. The father and Johnny's sister, who was about 12, I could see that they were very grief-stricken. Little Johnny handled everything like a cold scientist looking at a test tube. And I said, Johnny, do you have any questions? And he said, yes, one. What do we do with her clothes? He showed no emotion, no sachet, no sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender, nothing. And I noticed that in the coming weeks and months, Johnny, who had not had any emotion, began to lose chunks of hair until he was bald and he had no hair. That's what Freud called sublimation. Now, these, as I went through my mental file, I kept finding case after case after case, or parishioner after parishioner after parishioner, where there was an abandonment. A woman would stay in a rotten marriage because she didn't know that she could make it. If her husband beat her and she had to go to some woman's center to recover from her black eyes and bruises, perhaps broken arm, she would return to him because she didn't know how to make money. He was the one with the abandonment card. I'll explain more about the abandonment card as we go on, but here in 1978, I began to see that there's an instinct, not only for emotion, but an instinct that fears abandonment.